Welcome back, everybody. Last time we were talking film. Today, and for the next three videos that you will click on, it will be all about journalism. And this is actually a combination of what's in the textbook. It's also obviously a combination of what I'm going to talk about because journalism is kind of my thing. And so basically, if you are looking for information to go with what we're talking about here, best to look at chapter 13 and chapter 8, chapter 13 and chapter 8. But also make sure that you take careful note of this PowerPoint. It's a long one, and obviously in the module I've given you 2 weeks to finish everything just because there's going to be a lot of stuff to do with this particular chapter. But anyway, let's get started on the world of journalism, which is something that's near and dear to my heart. Obviously, as you know, I'm a sports producer and news writer at ABC7. I've had a long history in the journalism field. Basically went to college to be a journalist, was on camera for 10 plus years, and then of course have been a freelance sports producer and news writer at Channel 7 almost as long as I've been teaching. So anyway, I've got my foot in the door in both places. And so if you ever want to talk journalism with me, for those of you that are in the class that have that kind of interest, feel free to reach out. All right. Anyway, let's get to the journalism chapter. All right. I want to set the journalistic table. And by the way, we're going to be splitting this, as I said, into three parts. So we're going to go slide 1 through 11 on this particular part, and then on from there. All right. So let's set the journalistic table. Journalism is obviously an essential element of democracy. We live in a free society. We have the First Amendment, freedom of speech, obviously. And so basically journalism wraps itself around in that. And so basically journalism is the only media business specifically mentioned and protected by the US Constitution. It's been something that's been obviously in our DNA, since the Revolutionary War. And of course, as we get into this chapter later on, I'm going to be talking about journalism history and tell you why that's so important. Newspapers and magazines. We're not going to be talking too much about magazines. I know it's in the textbook. I know it's kind of combined with the I think chapter 8 has a combination of newspapers and magazines, but I will occasionally mention magazines. They do have a parallel universe to newspapers, but in general, I'm going to be focusing more on newspapers when we get to that section. But that being said, both industries, newspapers and magazines, and particularly the written side of it, the print side of the industry, definitely suffering, has taken a significant fall. That's not to say that people aren't getting content, but that content, of course, is in the digital universe. And so it's led to the loss of advertising. I think one of the common elements in the journalism world right now is the loss of advertising revenue in what's called legacy media. And so not only is it happening in the newspaper universe in spades, it's obviously the magazine industry has been devastated by the fact that no one is picking up magazines anymore or actually reading physical copies of newspapers. So therefore, advertisers are not really kind of keen to advertise in these spots because it's not worth the money. But we're also seeing advertising shifting in the broadcast side of things because, again, everything is moving to the digital or has moved to the digital universe. So when I talk about journalism, I don't want you to think journalism is dead. It's just that it's evolved. And so, and as part of that evolution, obviously, we're going to be talking about things in this particular, chapter, I would say, that are definitely not exactly warm and fuzzy when it comes to sort of forms of legacy media. Of course, the internet has changed the business model and style of news. It's a 24/7 operation now. And last but not least, of course, there is implications of using AI for news content creation. Not only are we seeing sometimes, I think, articles being generated by basically AI, but I can tell you just from me as an editor in the broadcast universe, there are all sorts of tools within our editing software now that is assisted by AI that in many ways has been helpful. But at the same time, I think there's definitely been a struggle between those that want to have original content and those that are using kind of AI as a shortcut. But anyway, there are definitely implications of using AI for news content creation. Concerns that we're producing too much information, right? In the digital universe, there is a infinite amount of information that's getting put out there, either on the web or in social media. And the problem is it's led to too much unchecked data and too little thoughtful discussion. So basically, you can also relate that to AI as well, although I can't pin it right. I can't pin AI as the most obvious suspect, but certainly the digital universe combined with AI has made to have way too much information out there. A lot of it's unverified, unchecked. The one thing I was taught when I was going through school is that you always, you made sure that you checked your sources. Well, sourcing now is very, very sketchy. And so basically, when you see a story, a news story out there, be very, very skeptical of it the minute you see it, and make sure that you're, having it. You're looking at comprehensive areas so that you can make a fair judgment. So there's no agreement on a basic set of shared facts, and honestly, in many ways, it's also very polarized. And so you can, be someone that is maybe a Democrat and, count yourself on the left, and, essentially you're married to just information that feeds that kind of philosophy, or you're conservative and you're on the right and you're married to, all sorts of websites and social media and other news outlets that just feed that, So it's very difficult that we can't seem to have an agreement on a basic set of shared facts. We'll dive more into that as we get into this chapter. Modern journalism rejects old news for new events or ideas. In fact, I would say that, years ago, there was a talk radio gentleman by the name of Rush Limbaugh. You may have heard of him, maybe you haven't. He died several years ago, but he talked about what's called drive-by reporting. That was kind of his take on it, which is to say that the fact is that we have a tendency in the media to really kind of focus on kind of the shiny light, and then once the shiny light is gone, we focus on the next thing, and so we definitely have a tendency to kind of spend more time on looking at new events or ideas and sometimes not understanding historical context, right? That's another thing, right? That oftentimes it feels like, at least I can tell you as someone who's been around a while, that that what we start analyzing and sort of shaping news based on the fact that it's never happened before, or it's unprecedented, which is complete, absolute BS. There's been lots of things that we've, take, the war in the Middle East right now. That's the most current thing that is happening while I'm recording this. And, we've had wars before, and we've had controversy, and we've had presidents that have made unpopular or popular decisions based on the conflict, and we've had criticism. And I think all of this is, we sit here and think that this is all sort of unprecedented in today's age, but that's not necessarily true. Anyway, there's a criteria for determining stories. When we talk about news, we talk about what makes something newsworthy. And so I want to spend a minute, because I actually share this slide with my MEA 125 class, which is my Intro to Multimedia Journalism class. We start talking about kind of just news gathering in general. And so I wanted you to have an understanding of what news is, or how do we determine what news is. And so certainly, I think, not necessarily from top to bottom, but we'll just go, I think certainly most importantly, I think timeliness is probably what makes news the most relevant to us, right? We are interested in what is new. Thus, it's in the name. News is news. I'm sorry, news is new. So basically, if you think about it, when we are actually listening on the radio, or we're scrolling down our feed, or, dare I say, you're one of the few people that actually tune into an actual newscast at 5 o'clock or 11 o'clock, or you get home and throw on cable news, or the fact is that you're looking for whatever the latest thing is. So obviously, what, obviously, whether that be, something about fires, it could be, the, Middle East, it could be the economy, it could be gas prices. There's just a number of things that happen every day that are new, that we, our antennas go up when we hear something is going on. We also are more interested in things that happen close by. That's what is called proximity. That's not, no need to apologize on that one. It's just that when things happen in our community, near our community, around our community, we have a tendency to pay more attention. So, for example, let's say hypothetically there was a bad, car accident at the intersection of Valencia McBean. That's right, obviously around the corner from school, and maybe there was some kind of situation where they had to close that intersection for a couple of hours. Well, you're going to pay attention to that because you're trying to get from your house to school. Maybe you're trying to get to work. You live in this community. So when you hear about that, you're more apt to listen versus, for example, if you heard about a car accident, say in Dallas, Texas, unless there's some other kind of like newsworthy factor in that. Generally speaking, there's accidents that happen around the country in every, city and town every day. And generally speaking, they don't move the needle here. We don't really, I don't want to say care, but that's kind of insensitive, but it's true. We don't really have an interest in stuff that happens outside of our community if it's just, part of everyday life. But if, for example, let's say you hear about a car accident in Dallas, Texas, and it just so happens that Taylor Swift's in that car accident. Now that becomes newsworthy, right? So the more important a person, the more valuable he or she is as a news source. We're a celebrity culture, if you will. And so therefore, when things that are, maybe we have a prominent politician that's involved in the news, or someone's, maybe it's a criminal case, someone's in trouble with the law, whatever, for example, Tiger Woods, right? Tiger Woods recently got in trouble with the law again when he rolled his car over in Florida, and now he's in rehab, right? Well, that made news all over the world, and made news here, right? Because he was a prominent celebrity. There's also consequence and impact, which is events that affect a great many people have a built-in news value. So, for example, things that happen with the economy, things that happen with war, things that happen with natural disasters, important court decisions, political decisions, et cetera. That's all falls under the consequence and impact category. And so that's events that affect a great many people have a built-in news value. And it's probably as important as it is for timeliness as it is that you have consequence and impact. Then finally, you have human interest, right? Stories that are ironic, bizarre, uplifting, out of the norm. We have a tendency to kind of pay attention to those things. I like to say you compare that to your social media feed when you see something completely unusual and you can't wait to share the video with somebody or the story with somebody. Well, that is all falls under the human interest area. All right, so where have we gotten our news, and where do we get our news, right? Well, obviously there's a dramatic change from past to the present. At one point, I think we even talked about this way back in chapter 1 about the fact that information was spread by word of mouth because technology had not really taken hold yet, and there was nothing really other than just being able to walk up to somebody and tell them what's going on. There was no way to document it other than what you had kind of observed and with your own brain, right? And of course, word of mouth was very, interestingly enough, at the very beginning, was very, wasn't accurate, right? Because if you've ever played a game of telephone, for example, and you walk up to somebody and tell them something, and then they tell the next person to the next person, et cetera, there's always a change in the way that story is told because someone maybe didn't hear you all the way 100% and they're just filling in the gaps. It could be how they, perceived the story. Maybe there was something about the story that was, not necessarily they didn't feel good about. So they try to, I don't know, clean it up when they tell the next person. Whatever it is, it basically the story gets shaped in a different way through word of mouth. Well, eventually, when we do get, newspapers and other things that people could read, eventually news would be spread by the Pony Express, right? This is pre-telegram. So news traveled as fast as the horse could travel. So what is that, like around 20 miles to 25 miles an hour, depending on and probably even less because the horse isn't going to be galloping the whole time. But in any event, that would take, so getting news, for example, from, the East Coast to, say, Texas, in the middle part of the 19th century before the telegram kind of took hold, took time. And there's actually a story, by the way, I don't know if I've told you this. I read a book called 1776 by David McCullough, and basically talked about how slow news traveled during, say, the Revolutionary War. In fact, there were battles fought after England had surrendered, because the people that were involved in the fight simply had no idea, because the information hadn't gotten there quick enough. I mean, think about it. If you're the King of England, and he talked about this, the King of England wanting to change a battle plan would have to give the information. They would do a courier. That person would get on a horse. It would take however long it took to get down to the boat dock, and then the boat would sail across to the colonies. That would take 10 to 14 days or so. Then the courier would have to get off the boat, find a horse, ride up to the front line, whatever that was. That might take a couple of nights, and then flip it around, and you're talking a good 4 to 6 weeks, right? So in any event, but of course, the telegram, the harnessing of the speed of light, right? Instant communication changed things. Trains also played a role, ships, all these things, right? Present day now, we've got television, we've got radio, we've got internet, social media. Of course, we've got newspapers and magazines waning in presence, but certainly they've moved their way into the digital realm. Now, one thing I do want to point out that I think is somewhat ironic is that the very first would have been word of mouth. The most recent, I would submit to you, the most recent way that we get information, or the most quickest way we get information, is through social media. I guess you could say the web as well, but think about the fact that social media, there's so much disinformation when it comes to social media, that you're getting into the territory of not exactly trusting what you hear, because the news might not be accurate. Well, that was the same problem that people had with word of mouth. Kind of funny how that works out. There's a couple of other sources, talk radio and podcasts. Obviously, talk radio for the folks that like to listen either on radio while they're driving in their car. We talked about that, obviously, but I think it was chapter 5, if I'm not mistaken. But obviously that has moved to the podcast realm. Obviously, people get lots of news from these platforms, but again, is it accurate, right? Does it come from a certain bias? I would say absolutely. Now, there are some podcasts that, kind of market themselves as down the middle, but there are plenty of podcast hosts out there that disseminate information, that talk about news of the day, but obviously present it in a way that, from their own perspective. I mean, look at Megyn Kelly, or look at Ben Shapiro, or Pod Save America. I read all sorts of different ones during your most recent assignment, and they're all over the map. So accuracy is certainly an issue. Well, let's get into news by the numbers. The newsroom employment in the U.S. dropped 26% between 2008 and 20. That's because largely newspapers really, the decline of newspapers in this country really, I think, hurt newsroom employment. There are 356,000 people employed in the U.S. broadcasting and content providers industry. I'm one of them, obviously. 47,000 or so news analysts, reporters, and journalists. The average salary, and this is I want to be accurate with this. The average salary, generally speaking, about $41,000 per year. That might have gone up a smidge, but since I looked at these numbers about 2 years ago. But the fact is that people are making about $20 an hour, which obviously doesn't sound great. But think about the fact that, not everybody is California, right? California has a minimum wage of $20 an hour. We could get into the pros and cons of whether that's a good or bad thing. I think, from a initial standpoint, of course, who wouldn't want to make $20 or $21 an hour, say working at, a fast food restaurant. But as we start to see from journalism, by the way, we started to see stories of studies that show that now that a lot of these minimum wage jobs are disappearing here in California because companies are cutting back on human workers in favor of AI because they can save money. So anyway, highest New York, by the way, highest average salary is in New York, which is pretty close to California in terms of number. $54,106. The lowest is South Dakota, $33,000. And this includes reporters, photographers, editors. Now, this is not for the newspaper industry. This is basically for broadcast and multimedia. We'll talk a little bit more about newspapers when we get to the next section here. Anyway, local stations, these are local news stations, TV news stations have devoted 6.2 hours a day to local news, which is up more than 3.5 hours from 2004. There's a very easy reason for that, is because when you look at the financial relationship between local television, when you see the relationship between local television and the network that owns it, or the network it actually is a part of, if you run local programming, you can also get local advertising, and that local advertising revenue gets to stay in the hands of that local TV provider, not the network. So, for example, if you're a station in, like when I was in Cheyenne, Wyoming, basically, we were an affiliate of CBS, but we were never owned by CBS. And so therefore the stations that own us, I think it was Benedict Broadcasting was one, Stauffer Communication was another. We got bought and sold many times while I was there, but they would actually keep the lion's share of local stuff. And then at night, when we would actually show primetime programming, all that money would then go to the network. So anyway, I digress. 50% of the public cited television as their most important source of local news, and 77% of local news provides viewers with 77% believe that local news provides viewers with important information. So there's still a trust of local news, which is nice, because I'm going to show you some numbers here in a little bit, probably in the quite honestly in the next slide. I'm sorry, in the next video, that will show you just how much trust has diminished with just journalism in general. So it's at least gratifying to know, as someone who works in local news and local television, that local news still maintains somewhat of a relationship with the population. All right, so here's a graphic on how much money per hour, and you can see, obviously, if you become a GM, a general manager of a station, you're doing pretty well. You can see if you're actually an engineer, engineers get paid pretty good, almost $40 an hour. And then you'll notice that basically the ones that make the least amount of money are probably the camera operators, although that is deceiving. That's camera operators in the studio, which is something that's kind of slowly going away. If you're actually a field photographer, where you actually carry a camera out in the field, you can actually make a lot more money. But anyway, take a look at those numbers. Those are all hourly wages. I would invite you, but I'm going to move on. Okay, categories of news and reporting. Well, there are several, and I want you to understand the differences, because I think it's crucial when you're watching, consuming, absorbing news, absorbing information, to know the differences. So hard news makes up the bulk of news reporting. Hard news includes the 5 W's and the H. And if you don't know your journalism, or you didn't take it in high school, or you're not in, maybe you haven't been introduced to it yet, it's who did it, what happened, where did it happen, why did it happen, when did it happen, and how did it happen. So anytime you see a story, could be sports, could be news, could be entertainment, whatever it might be, you need to ask those basic questions: who, what, why, where, when, and how, right? And hard news also has significance for large numbers of people. So when we talk about what makes something newsworthy, for example, consequence and impact, very much part of hard news. Proximity, very much part of hard news. Timeliness, obviously, very much a part of hard news. I mean, those three in particular really kind of fall into this category. But you generally see hard news at the top of news broadcasts, front pages of the paper or media websites. That's usually hard news. So anytime you go to your foxnews.com, cnn.com, AP, pick your favorite website, Google News, whatever it might be, you're always going to see hard news stories. And of course, no doubt, it's unilateral right now that Middle East is certainly front and center. And of course, if we had gone back in our time machine, let's say, a year ago, it would have been all presidential election, right? A year and a half ago. So anyway, it definitely is the case. All right. Another one is called soft news, which is soft news is synonymous with feature stories, which cover a wide territory. And it basically, soft news stories or feature stories interest the audience and relies on human interest, I should say, for news value. So basically, it's not that you're not getting informed. It's not like you're getting a who, what, why, where, when, and how. But in addition to that, you're also getting sort of the, I guess, viral nature, if you will, the emotional appeal. Feature stories have a tendency to not be hardcore in terms of here's a story about, Israel and Gaza. Here's a story about the Pacific Palisades burning up. It's more about, hey, here's a story about, if you were talking about the Palisades as a benchmark, the hard news would be here's the latest on what's burned up. Here's the latest acreage on the fire. Here's the weather forecast and what might be happening tomorrow. A feature story might be somebody, discovering a family heirloom or a series of family heirlooms that survived the fire, and why is that significant? That's really kind of the quote unquote soft news comparison versus hard news. But it can also be appealing to people's curiosity, sympathy, skepticism, amazement. Soft news can be about places, people, animals, topics, events, or products. Feature stories or soft news can be entertaining. Obviously, it can be emotional, anything in between. So I wanted to introduce you to my first video example, which it's called The Interesting Family Pet. And so this is a story that was put together by a gentleman named Mike Castellucci, who's one of the best feature storytellers in the country. He and Boyd Huppert, who is another one. Boyd is a feature storyteller in Minnesota, and Mike is now in Denver. So anyway, Mike was working in Texas several years ago, and basically put together one of the more unique stories that I've ever seen. And so let me stop sharing. Let me go here and show you Mike Castellucci with the quintessential example of a feature story.
So who do you think is the biggest star in North Texas? Well, 10 years ago, reporter Mike Castellucci put a pretty big guy on the map, and since then, he's been featured all over the world. In tonight's WFAA original, Mike returns to Quinlan because the guy we're talking about has gotten a lot bigger.
When Car City has only one car on the lot, you know it's a small town.
Just like a kid. You never know what he's going to do.
He'll come through this door.
But not everything in Quinlan, Texas is little.
I know it sounds crazy moving all this stuff, but I have no choice.
In the Bridges home,
RC!
Sharon and RC move the furniture constantly just to accommodate their teenage.
To let Wild Thing in. Rearrange the entire house.
They do anything for him.
Wild Thing has always been a good boy in the house. He's never torn up any china or anything.
Like making sure he's comfortable in the house. All 2,500 pounds of him.
Since you've seen him.
Oh, he's unpredictable. He come after me one time today already.
I beat to a different drum, and here it comes, matter of fact. It was my idea to bring Wild Thing in the house when he was a calf.
See, if you're hearing anything I'm saying right now, I met the Bridges more than a decade ago when their buffalo was a baby. Or about 1,000 pounds ago.
Last year, Germany celebrated his birthday. They were here for his birthday.
Looks like he's fixing to go into his other room right now.
And after sharing their story, everybody wanted to see Wild Thing living.
See, Wild Thing's not crazy about going down the steps.
In the living room.
It seems normal to me, but evidently it doesn't seem normal to other people.
This is an article for our last television show that we did. It was our 65th television show.
You did our first television show. And most time in Ripley's, you only get a paragraph. He got 2 full pages.
Not a lot of news in Quinlan, but they keep making it here.
I am videoing it.
If there was any doubt, the Buffalo's family. Look at their home movies through the years.
Hi there, baby. Mama loves you. Oh,
trying to get RC's attention.
Oh, now he's got to rub his... Oh, watch out!
And acting as best man in Sharon and RC's vow renewal.
Did It's so pretty.
So after you get comfortable with a buffalo roaming in a
I'd
home,
love to have had a picture of that one.
it's easy to see this isn't about a 2,500-pound house pet scratching the hardwoods. It's a love story.
Oh yeah, I love him. We're best friends.
It's respect both ways.
Really? You gonna lick my purse?
It's that simple.
Mama should have moved it, huh?
And when you realize that, the unbelievable suddenly becomes easy to understand.
Oh, he's still a baby to me, but he's really big now. But I look at him as a little baby.
In Quinlan, Texas, Mike Castellucci,
When the grandkids come over, we have to put up everything.
Channel 8 News.
When Wild Thing comes in the house, we don't have to put up anything.
So there is the story of Wild Thing, the pet buffalo, if you can believe that. Basically, let me get back to my my PowerPoint here. So that was Mike Castellucci, and he is an absolutely amazing storyteller. And yeah, so there was basically he was there with a friend of mine who's my sports guy at Channel 7. His name is Kurt Sandoval. Kurt Sandoval, by the way, is your secret code word for part 1. So make sure you note that. In any event, Kurt actually joined Mike on that shoot several years ago and was sending me photos of this buffalo on his iPhone, and I didn't understand what was going on until I actually saw the story. So that is a quintessential, if you will, feature story. All right, then you have investigative reports, which basically investigative reports unearth significant information about matters of public importance through the use of non-routine information gathering methods. So hidden cameras, right? You know, a lot of times, yeah, I mean, hidden cameras is kind of the most famous one that you'll hear of. The Watergate affair made it popular back in when President Nixon was in office. There were a couple of folks from the Washington Post, Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein, who basically kind of uncovered the fact that Nixon and his some of his cronies basically broke into the Watergate Hotel to try to get dirt on the Democratic, party and Democratic, the guy that he was running against. And basically, it led to him resigning. He was either going to get impeached or resign. So he resigned. It was one of the more turbulent times for the American presidency in the last 50 years, or actually I could say in the last century or last century and a half. So in any event, that was kind of they basically met with a guy in a parking garage who had a nickname of Deep Throat. I think that turned out to be Alexander Haig, if memory serves me correct. But in any event, investigative journalism is really sort of at the heart of of why journalism is important. It's basically designed to go after bad people, right? Or people that do bad things. But the problem is it requires a good deal of time and money. I have a former student who specializes in investigative journalism. She came back to my class recently and talked about all the things that she does to kind of uncover information, including filing Freedom of Information Acts and having to go look through court documents, et cetera, which all takes a lot of time. And sometimes newsrooms don't have time to pull reporters off of kind of daily storytelling to really kind of take a more closer look at things, to uncover. So anyway, they do run longer. Now, I want to show you what I think is the gold standard of investigative journalism. And I know that this show and this network have been in the news quite a bit over the past year, but it's 60 Minutes. And certainly 60 Minutes has made its mistakes. There's one coming up here very soon that I will do, and I think in the second video. But I still believe in what 60 Minutes, the mission of 60 Minutes, which is it was basically put together by Don Hewitt in 1968. That's who created it. His whole moniker was "Tell Me a Story." And basically, it was the ability to dive into something for 11 to 13 minutes, which is kind of almost like mini documentary style, as opposed to a minute and a half or a minute 45 story you might see in a local broadcast. And it really, 60 Minutes does some exemplary work. And they just put out one within the past couple days before this actual lecture on high-speed rail. And I don't know if you guys have been paying attention, but we have spent an unbelievable amount of money here in California to build high-speed rail that's not really gotten built. And I'm going to show you this video here, and I think it'll probably wind up angering you, I suspect, because the idea of putting high-speed rail in this country, I know, is a dream of many. If you've ever been to Europe, obviously Europe has high-speed rail and it's very convenient, but for some reason we can't get out of our own way here. So I want to play this for you because 60 Minutes obviously spent a lot of time, CBS News and 60 Minutes spent a lot of time basically talking about high-speed rail and honestly what a failure it is right now here in California. So here we go. Let me share it. And again, if it gets taken down here, you will not see it. You can watch it. I'll include the link in the module so you guys can see it anyway. 60-minute story on high-speed rail. I am sure if you watched it from start to finish, you probably have your opinions that you've drawn on it. I certainly know where I stand. Like I said, like I started saying earlier, that, I think the idea of high-speed rail is, I certainly enjoyed doing it in Western Europe and whatnot, but it is an absolute money pit and waste of money right now. And it's obviously backed up by what I think is some very excellent storytelling. So anyway, but that is investigative journalism. That is, basically an opportunity to sit there and learn about something, a topic that, is clearly financially impactful here in California. And so reflect on that, if you will. All right. Last but not least of this particular, I should say, part one of this video is the news reporting has obviously come a long way in the digital age, right? Digital revolution has changed news reporting. As we talked about, there are tremendous amounts of sources of news out there now, from everything from legacy media like ABC, NBC, CBS, LA Times, etc., to new media or multimedia. We have blogs now, one of those that's highlighted on there if you want to click through it, in your own time. Politico.com is actually a political blog, which is, has tremendous amount of influence in Washington, D.C. and beyond. We've heard the term citizen journalism. In fact, I'll be circling back to citizen journalism as part of your newspaper chapter, but the idea of citizen journalism is of the fact that you have citizens now, like you and me, that because of these guys, right, our phones, we're able to document lots of different things and post those things to our social media, to our Instagram, to our Twitter, to TikTok, etc., right, Facebook. And we actually now have the ability to shape the news, right? And there's a lot of stations out there that really do rely on what citizens actually record on their phones to tell a story. Obviously, one of the things that I talk about in my MEA 125 class, and I won't waste a lot of time with it here, is that citizen journalism goes back pretty far. And when we talk about kind of the digital age of citizen journalism, you can say that, a lot of people, I think, assume that the bombing of the London subway in around 2005 was really kind of the first example of citizen journalism. But I think there's earlier examples, even pre-phone. There's significantly earlier examples. I think probably the one that really kind of shaped the world was the Rodney King beating. They basically, you had someone with a video camera that was, literally videotaped a 47-minute police stop of Rodney King. And of course, if you've seen the video, which I'm not going to show it to you, but if you've seen the video of, Rodney King getting beaten by LAPD, much of that was in the last, I would say 10 to 12 minutes of that video. There's a whole 35 minutes before that happens. But anyway, look up on the history of that, because it's really interesting how that all came to be. But that was really an early example of citizen journalism. There's also something called hyperlocal, which is basically, because of social media, because of the web, we are able to produce content that is very, very local to communities. I look at Los Angeles, for example. Over 20 million people live in the greater Los Angeles area, with all these different towns, and ABC7 true story. Like on the weekends at ABC7, we only have a handful of people that work in the newsroom. And so we can only cover so much. So Santa Clarita, for example, oftentimes gets overlooked unless there's high winds or there's a high profile murder or a brush fire. Generally speaking, you're not going to see much of what's going on here in Santa Clarita, but you can now because you have websites that are particularly aimed at and social media pages that are particularly aimed at things that are happening right here in Santa Clarita. You've got KHTS, the local hometown radio station that has its own website. Obviously, Canyons News has its own website that the students run here at the college. SCV TV. You've got a number of Instagram and Facebook groups that focus primarily on Santa Clarita. And so hyperlocal is something that's very much a part of the landscape now of journalism. And then finally, you have this term called backpack journalist. And again, MEA 125, I spent a lot of time defining what a backpack journalist is, but essentially it's kind of a jack of all trades, someone that is comfortable in taking out a camera, shooting, writing, producing, editing, transmitting information or streaming it, I should say, kind of all of the above. And so I want to show you an example of that from a backpack journalism standpoint. It's what our students do here at COC. And this one is from one of our recent shows. And this one is actually, just to show you, we have an actual website called canyonsnews.com. And we basically publish not just articles, but videos up to this, to this website. This is just one, but there's a number of different stories on here. And this one is called the Cat Fe. And I thought this would be kind of fun because it's a feature story. And it was put together by one of my students. Her name is Gigi Monteforte. And it's all about Santa Clarita's first cat lounge. So if you're interested in adopting a kitty or like cats, or you're just a pet lover like me, you might enjoy this.
At first glance, it feels like a cozy lounge, quiet, calm, and filled with curious cats. But this Cat Fe isn't just about spending time with cats. It's about helping them get adopted. All of the cats here come from a local rescue, giving them a chance to be seen outside of a traditional kennel.
With my lounge, I want it to be an open space where cats get to show their true personalities and potentially get adopted.
Instead of being seen through a cage, visitors can experience each cat's personality up close, and that connection matters.
These cages won't stay full for long. That's the goal. With every adoption, one cat finds a home and another gets a chance to be rescued. It's a small step that makes a big difference.
According to the ASPCA, 273,000 cats were euthanized in 2024. Experts say adoptions are crucial to giving these animals a second chance at life.
Adopting from a shelter or a rescue helps find a place for a homeless animal instead of taking one from a breeder and creating space to save more homeless animals. But spay and neuter is also very important because we need to reduce the number of animals being born in order to find homes for all of the ones that are alive.
Spaces like the Cat Fe bridge that gap, connecting animals in need with people ready to help. Whether it's adoption or fostering, every interaction can lead to a second chance.
One of the greatest ways that we can increase our capacity is to expand our foster network because our facility can only hold so many animals. But we have a great foster network, and I actually really, really want to expand our foster base to Santa Clarita.
Sometimes finding a forever home starts with a simple visit. For Canyons News, I am Gigi Monteforte.
And that is Gigi's story on the Cat Fe over in Canyon Country. And so I thought you might like that. So basically, that is the first of 3 parts of this journalism lecture. We're going to get into part 2 here in the next video. So again, please reflect on the PowerPoint that you have that's attached with this module. And I would encourage you to go back and look at the videos if you have any questions. But I will see you for part 2 when you click on that. Thanks.